This is Living History Footnotes for Lagoon City. If you haven't seen the main episode yet, please check it out first. I will link it in the description. This episode might be a little bit longer because I've got some clips to queue up for you. So in today's episode, we'll go over some deleted scenes that I decided to cut from the main video. We'll talk about another resort community on the other side of Lake Simcoe, and we'll look at what the future might hold for places like these. All that and more, so let's get into it. Here are a couple of shots that I ended up cutting from the main episode. I just felt like they didn't really fit with the flow, and I thought they would be better suited in a footnotes episode. Our first one is about some indigenous heritage in the area. An important Wendat trail ran through here back when it was still a wetland. There was a small, dry strip of land that connected Wendat villages to Lake Simcoe. There's a road in Lagoon City that follows part of that same route, and it has the name Old Indian Trail. Yeah, not the greatest of names, especially by modern standards, but at least it's a reminder of that past. In this part of the province, settlers have erased many traces of Indigenous history. This next shot talks a little bit about the difference between our past and our current understandings of the importance of wetlands. I felt that the rest of the script did a good enough job of explaining these details that I didn't need this extra little bit. It's also a little bit politically tongue-in-cheek, so enjoy that. There's a big difference between being blissfully unaware and being willfully ignorant. This was the 1960s, and environmental concerns were thought of very differently than they are now. But with what we now know about how important wetlands are, the thought of building on them today seems absurd. People who are more familiar with the Lake Simcoe area may have been watching the main video and wondered why I never used the words Friday Harbour. And if you're not familiar with that, it is a resort community just across the lake from Lagoon City, and it's also fairly new. Now, a fairly new community like Lagoon City might seem to negate the argument that we heard in the main video that a place like this could never be built again, but I don't think that's necessarily the case because there are some differences between the two places that I'd like to go over now. The first of these key differences is that Friday Harbour was planned explicitly as a more seasonal resort vacation type community versus Lagoon City, which was always intended for year-round residents. And actually in Friday Harbour, there were regulations that you could not stay in your condo for more than 300 days out of the year. These regulations have changed in recent years. I believe in 2020 is when it was repealed so that you can now live in Friday Harbour year-round, but its definition of a year-round versus a seasonal community is still sort of in flux. Another one of the key differences between Lagoon City and Friday Harbour is much denser as a community, although it is very much still car dependent. There are some shops and services within the community, but you will still have to go elsewhere for other services. At Friday Harbour, there was already some major dredging work that had taken place because there was a marina on the site that had a bit of a canal system to get into the various bays. This marina was abandoned and expanded for the Friday Harbour development, so theoretically it would have been slightly less impactful than starting from scratch, and in the case of Friday Harbour, they weren't paving over wetlands, they were just paving over prime farmland. I came across an interesting research paper by somebody named Lucy Lynch, who is completing a master's degree and studied Friday Harbour. She noted that there was a lot of pushback to the project originally, and there was also a lot of efforts on the parts of the developers to quash that opposition. The other curious thing about Friday Harbour is it was approved just before the Lake Simcoe Protection Act came into force. So it got its approval, and even though construction started with this act in force, it was grandfathered in. Now, that aspect is something that was not much of a surprise to Stephen Murphy, who was the ecologist from the University of Waterloo that we met in the main video. Here are his thoughts on that.
Well, don't forget, some of the reasons why these things were allowed to proceed was because they were essentially grandfathered. Like if they were given the permits, say back in the 60s or even earlier sometimes, or the 70s, before some of these sort of particular laws came in force, the courts and then the various planning boards we've had, most of the time they've ruled in favor of them, which I can kind of get, but it's kind of silly because it means like, well, you knew that was wrong. You're still going to let it go forward. I think the only time they have ruled against it is if it's clearly going to be so much of a hazard that people would get killed.
Lynch also writes in her paper that some of the lessons learned from the Friday Harbour development and planning process might be used to justify similar projects going forward, which is interesting because there's the other belief that we should stop building such intense developments in sensitive environments, especially along waterfronts. There's another argument that I think is worth mentioning here. Some people feel that it's better to have people living near water because they will see and experience the impacts that they cause in a more direct way, especially on the water. If you're starting to pollute the water, that will be very noticeable very fast. But does that justify putting more intense development in waterfront communities? I'm not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments. There's another major unknown factor when it comes to both new and existing waterfront developments, and that is insurance. Here are some of Murphy's thoughts on that topic.
That's one of the biggest sort of drivers that people forget about is the insurance companies starting to look at some of these places going, we're not insuring you. We're not going to insure you, and it's going to become a bigger problem. I think people realize how big of a problem it's going. These people are very steely-eyed business individuals, right? I mean, they don't look necessarily just environmental. They do incorporate it into it, but they start looking at these things going, it's like, we're not insuring that. The risk is ridiculous. So this is one of the things that people have really got to watch for, especially when the housing market was crazy. I'm thinking, you better make sure you can get insurance on that thing. And you better think about 10 years from now, if you're young, can you still get insurance on it, right? Maybe you can't.
These are understandably very difficult conversations to have, both from the uncertainty we simply don't know what the future will bring, plus the deep emotional connections that a lot of people feel to these communities. Now, even though they are difficult conversations, they are still very important to have, but they have to be done in a proper way. If you ask Murphy, he says that people like him, like ecologists, probably aren't the best people to be leading those conversations.
I mean, we can offer advice technically side on this technical side of it and things, but a lot of it's going to have to come from people who handle much more of the sociology and psychology and the planning side of the equation. I mean, individuals to think about sort of confronting some of the challenges that may come forward. And there are going to be individuals that just don't want to listen. It's just too tough to listen to, right? I mean, you get a beloved area, maybe your parents had it or something like that, hell, your grandparents. There's a reluctance at the end of the day to really, acknowledge that. And I think I'd be the same way. I don't think I'm superior or anything like that. I think I'd have the same kind of trouble. But the trouble is, the reality is you start seeing your backyard disappear year after year after year. It's going to be something that people are going to have some really difficult conversations. So if you start now, long before it's probably going to be a proper place like Lagoon City, then you've actually got the opportunity. The trouble is, all of us, you, me included, likely, is that we're really bad at kind of sort of, getting around the discounting problem. That is to say that we don't really value anything 100 years in the future. We value much more today. We want the dollar in the pocket today. We want what we have today, actually. And almost every one of us is like that. So that's the reason why it's tough.
Thanks for that, Stephen. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Living History Footnotes about Lagoon City. As always, I encourage you to check out these places for yourself. When you do go, be sure to take a photo, tag me on Instagram. I'm at Living History CA, and use hashtag Living History CA as well, just so I have a better chance of being able to see it. With this place, if you do go to visit, please do note that the beaches aren't for public access. You have to be living or staying in Lagoon City in order to get access to them, but it still can be quite interesting to take a drive around and look at what the community is all about. These branches are way too low. Anyways, next week's episode actually has some bonus footage that's going to come along with it. Why did I film here? Next week's episode will have bonus video. So the next Footnotes episode will actually be 3 weeks from now, bonus video 2 weeks from now, and next week, the main episode is going to be a story about how one man's passion for art has resonated so deeply with some people that they have actually become themselves part of his creations, and it'll stand for the test of time. Until then, be well.